At 11:14 p.m. on January 8, 2004, a user posted a message on the Nichan forums. This might just be my imagination, but can I share something with you guys? What followed became one of the most famous threads in Nichan history, and a modern urban legend. It was the start of Kisaragi Station. For those still unaware, Kisaragi Station follows Hasumi, a Nichan user, as she finds herself lost after getting on the train. She finds all sorts of discrepancies from her usual train trip, including the stations being further apart than normal, and passing through tunnels that don't exist on her line. At the end, she gets off at Kisaragi Station, a station she has no knowledge of, and doesn't appear to exist anywhere in Japan. Other users attempted to help her in real time, sharing advice and researching on her behalf, but things get weirder and weirder until a man appears and offers to drive her to the nearest station. Her final 2 messages before disappearing, just before 4 a.m, mention that the car is heading further and further into the mountains, and the driver is starting to act strange, muttering something she doesn't understand. This is the last anyone ever hears of her, and a legend was born. But is Kisaragi Station a real place? Hasumi gives several names and solid details during the story, and people have spent years trying to find where she might have gone. Did she really travel to another dimension? Or did she end up at a phantom station in the real world? It's a mystery that, over 16 years later, people are still trying to solve. In the story, several place names are mentioned. First of all is Kisaragi Station itself, a station that doesn't seem to exist anywhere in Japan. To date, no one has found any station that currently or even formerly was known as Kisaragi. Hasumi also mentions a tunnel close to Kisaragi Station, which has the name Isanuki written above it. This may or may not be how it's read in English, as she only gives the kanji characters, and it's not a combination seen anywhere outside this story. She also mentions the place name Hina, which an old man tells her when she asks where they are. Hina is a real place, in Shizuoka Prefecture no less, close to Mount Fuji. It's a fair distance from Hamamatsu, where Hasumi supposedly first started her journey, and she mentions that there's no way that's possible. With these 3 names, it's possible to start digging into the potential facts behind the story, but let's take a look at a few more details first. One of the very first things Hasumi mentions is that she got on the train at Shin Hamamatsu Station. This is a real station, and it's here that almost immediately the veracity of the story comes into question. One of the very first things Hasumi posts is that she thinks she got on the wrong train. Her first post is at 11:14 p.m. By this point, she has noticed that something is strange and wants to share it, so she's presumably already been on the train for a while. 4 minutes later, she finally mentions that she's on the train and things seem odd. Then, at 11:23 p.m, 10 minutes after her first post, she mentions that the train hasn't stopped for the last 20 minutes, which would put her getting on the train sometime before 11 p.m. She then mentions that the train normally stops every few minutes, with 5 minutes between stops being the longest. Yet this train is stopping only every 7 to 8 minutes. This presents several problems. First, Shin Hamamatsu is a real station, but it only goes one way. It's the end of the line, meaning trains can only go in one direction. It's literally impossible for Hasumi to have gotten on the wrong train, because every single one goes the same way and stops at the exact same stations. She mentions she uses this train all the time, so it's not like it's her first time here either. She knows this station well, so she would know that the trains only go one way. For her to say, "I think I've gotten on the wrong train," immediately puts into doubt that she has ever used Shin Hamamatsu Station at all. The trains leaving from Shin Hamamatsu also stop at stations every few minutes, with the largest time between stations being only 3 minutes. Hasumi mentions the longest time as usually being 5. This can potentially be waved away as Hasumi generalizing, but it's also worth pointing out. In any case, there is zero chance for Hasumi to get on the wrong train at Shin Hamamatsu, and if she used the station all the time, as she claims, she would know that. This makes the claim itself strange and contradictory. But let's assume for a moment that Hasumi really did get on the train, as usual, at Shin Hamamatsu. Hasumi never mentions which station she usually gets off at, but trains from Shin Hamamatsu stop every few minutes on the Enshu railway line before ending at Nishikajima Station. The entire trip takes roughly 32 minutes and never leaves the city. There are, as Hasumi mentions, no tunnels between the beginning and ending stations, yet at 12:19 AM, almost an hour after her first post, and twice the time it should have taken to reach the final station, she mentions leaving a tunnel and the train slowing down. This would easily place her somewhere in the mountains of Shizuoka, if she was following the normal laws of time and space, and if the train lines even went that far to begin with. They don't. The tracks end at Nishikajima. But in either case, this still wouldn't put her anywhere near Hina over by Mount Fuji, or at least our version of it. At 1:12 AM, Hasumi mentions she's left the station and is following the train line back. There's nothing around but mountains and open fields, which could honestly place her outside any large city in Japan. She mentions calling both her parents and the police, the latter of which brushes her off because they think she's pranking them. So it would seem that her phone works, if nothing else. Of course, she's posting on the Nichan forums, so she kind of needs her phone to work for the story to get through. The next strange point happens at 2:09 AM. An old man appears as she's walking along the tracks, with only a single leg. The man yells at her, before disappearing into thin air before her very eyes. Although shocked, she still keeps going, and at 2:45 AM, she comes across Isanuki Tunnel. This, like Kisaragi Station, doesn't exist anywhere in Japan. She passes through the tunnel, which many posters following her story in real time believed would bring her back to our reality, and she soon runs into someone who offers to take her to the nearest station. This happens at 3:20 AM, over 4 hours since her first post. This is the man who mentions that they're in Hina. At 3:37, they are heading towards the mountains, and at 3:44, Hasumi mentions that her battery is dying, and the man is muttering to himself. This is the final post she ever makes. It's impossible, if we take the story to be true, for Hasumi to have ended up anywhere in our world. There's no way. Yet, over the years, some have suggested Saginomiya Station, one of the stations on the Enshu line, as the potential basis for Kisaragi. It's a small station, seeing only roughly 1,000 passengers daily, and for a while people claimed that it was unmanned, yet this was later proven to be untrue. Plus, it only takes 14 minutes to reach Saginomiya from Shin Hamamatsu in the middle of the city, so the timelines and environment don't fit in the slightest. It's not even a stretch to believe, because there's not a single thing about either station that lines up. It's evident that Kisaragi Station does not exist. Not in this plane of existence anyway. There's a reason it's known as one of the most popular isekai, or parallel world stories, after all. If we take the story at face value, and believe that Hasumi was telling the truth, then the moment she got on the train at Shin Hamamatsu must have been the moment she shifted into whatever reality Kisaragi Station exists in. And whether you believe in the possibility of alternate realities and the possibility of reaching one of those from a random train station is up to you. But Kisaragi Station, as told of in the post, does not exist anywhere in our world. It's also interesting to note that Kisaragi Station might actually be the work of two separate people. All posts on 2chan are anonymous, and the story that we know today was actually posted by two separate IDs. The first 5 posts attributed to Hasumi are posted under an anonymous name, and this person at no point ever mentions a specific location, other than a private railway line in Shizuoka. It's not until 12:08 AM that this user apparently switches from an anonymous handle to Hasumi, and this Hasumi is the one who goes into further detail, mentioning Shin Hamamatsu as the starting point and creating the entire story of Kisaragi. Everyone assumes it is the same person, and, at least in the thread, it was never questioned. It's possible that someone started a vague thread about a train going somewhere it shouldn't have, and then someone else picked it up and expanded upon it. But it's also possible that Hasumi just decided to make herself more visible by changing her name to something that stood out amongst all the anonymous handles. Ultimately, we will likely never know. Another interesting tidbit, and perhaps one lesser known to Western audiences, is that after disappearing in 2004, Hasumi apparently resurfaced on 2chan in 2011. Someone claiming to be the original Hasumi, who disappeared from Kisaragi Station, posted that she had returned. But for her, no time had passed at all, even though 7 years had passed for the rest of us. This seemingly confirmed that Kisaragi Station exists outside time and space as we know it, although she offered no explanation of how she ended up there in the first place. According to Hasumi, or at least someone posing as her, after the car stopped in the mountains, a light enveloped it and the driver was annihilated. As she approached the car, another man appeared and told her to run. And so she did, crying and running the whole way back to the closest station that she could remember. When she got there, she was apparently back in our world, and 7 years had passed. No other explanation was given, and many have argued against this being a true update, as there's no way to confirm whether it's the same person or not. Like most things on 2chan, it's up to you whether you want to believe she safely returned or not. Most people would agree that the story of Kisaragi Station is fake. It was a fascinating online experiment that took place in a time when the internet, and particularly anonymous forums, were finding their footing in Japan. Someone took advantage of the 2chan format in a unique and, quite honestly, fascinating way to create an urban legend before people's very eyes, and it hasn't ever been replicated on such a scale again. People have tried, but none have been able to capture the magic that was Hasumi's live adventure into the unknown. But what do you guys think? Could Kisaragi Station really exist, or was it all an elaborate prank that the internet fell for and continues to fall for? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time. Kunekune, It's one of the most famous legends to come out of the Nichan boards, and there are a few horror fans who haven't heard of it. The story describes something white in the distance, far out in the rice fields, waving and wriggling, like its Japanese name suggests. Seeing it from a distance is frightening enough, but if you see it up close, the mere sight will drive you insane. This particular creepypasta was first posted in 2001 under the title, "You're Better Off Not Knowing." Another story was then posted in 2003 that basically expanded upon the original but didn't make too many changes. This one was simply titled Kunekune, and it was here that the legend really took off. Numerous stories of this mysterious creature have been posted over the years, including what fans call the Kunekune 7, a collection of 7 stories that Nichan users consider to be the main bulk of the creature's legend. But who, or what, is Kunekune exactly? Could it be a real creature? To start, it's important to delve into the information the Kunekune 7 provides us with. These stories are interesting because of how wide and varied they are. These stories are not told by the same author. Every single one is different. Perhaps the most important thing is how Kunekune is described. In stories 1, 2, 3, and 5, the creature is described as being white in appearance. In 4, it's described as black. In 7, the creature isn't seen by the author at all. And in 6, perhaps the biggest exception in every way to the rest of the stories, Kunekune is described as a young male runner. The majority of the time it seems to be white, but even this isn't fully agreed upon. Other than its white appearance, Kunekune is most easily distinguishable by its strange waving and wriggling, like one of those balloons you see outside car dealerships that wildly wave their arms around in the air. This is seen in stories 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Again, the creature isn't seen in 7, so it's impossible to say. And it could be argued that the runner in story 6 does fit the strange movements the creature is known for, but it's still not quite the same as the others. Still, this is the one trait that every story seems to agree upon, and for good reason. Kunekune literally means to wave, to squirm, or to wriggle in Japanese. Without that, the creature just isn't Kunekune. It also seems to appear in a variety of environments. It's seen in rice fields, which is perhaps the most common location, but it's also been seen at the beach, in a quarry, and even in the city. At the very least, this tells us that the creature can freely move around and isn't tied to one spot. It's also interesting to note that Kunekune is most often tied to Akita Prefecture, as the first stories placed it there. But it's not necessarily stuck there. It can apparently appear anywhere in Japan. Lastly, and the aspect of Kunekune that makes it so dangerous, it's said that merely looking upon the creature is enough to drive you insane. This happens in every story except for 6, the exception to most rules. The extent of the madness differs somewhat, however. Most agree that just seeing the creature in the distance isn't enough. You need to see it up close. More importantly, you need to see it clearly. If you have bad eyesight, then you are, for the most part, safe. But the creature doesn't have to be right in front of you for this to work. If you grab some binoculars to check it out in the distance, that's enough. You've now lost your sanity. The key point here seems to be seeing the creature both up close and clearly. Once these two conditions are met, sanity is lost. From this we can piece together a somewhat general picture of the creature and its habitat. It's most famous for appearing in rice fields, but it can appear anywhere. Just like its name, it squiggles and squirms, dances and wriggles. And while it's most often white, it can appear as other colors as well. And perhaps even most confusingly, it can look just like a real person. So, what is it? One common theory is that it's nothing more than a mirage, an illusion, a hallucination. Think about a hot summer day. When you look out over the horizon, you can see what looks like waves wafting off the ground. Some have suggested that Kunekune is nothing more than that. Perhaps a real person, a scarecrow, or some type of human shape in the distance that appears to be wriggling in the heat. But if it's just an illusion, then how does seeing it drive you mad? Again, it's been suggested that this could be happening because of heat stroke. None of the Kunekune 7 are told during the cold months. In fact, almost every single one of them specifically mentions summer, or the hotter months of the year. Even in 6, the exception to most Kunekune rules, the runner is covered in sweat from the heat. Yet, in story 3, Kunekune approaches during a typhoon. The author is inside at the time, and while it does take place during the summer holidays, they're unlikely to be suffering from heat stroke at the time. This is yet another exception, and why it's so difficult for people to agree exactly on what Kunekune is. If it's not a hallucination brought on by impending heat stroke, then what else could it be? Perhaps the easiest explanation is that it's an unknown cryptid, or more likely, an unknown yokai. Yokai were created to explain all sorts of unexplainable phenomena, after all. Creatures like the kamaitachi, a weasel with sickles for hands, were created to explain the strange phenomena of being cut by a whirlwind that otherwise made no sense. In that same vein, perhaps Kunekune is a modern yokai to explain impending heat stroke, or the strange heat waves distorting images in the distance. Another explanation as to what Kunekune may be, or at the very least, what may have inspired the story, is that it's nothing more than a scarecrow. Just not the type of scarecrow that we think of today. According to various legends, long ago real people were used as scarecrows in rice fields. People who were considered not very useful to the community. They were tied to large posts in the ground, and their wriggling and squirming while trying to escape would frighten the nearby wildlife. Perhaps Kunekune was one of those people, eventually transformed by rage into the creature we know it as today. Kunekune comes with a lot of inconsistencies, making it hard to really pin down what the creature may potentially be. At best, almost everyone agrees that it looks like a waving, dancing figure, and that seeing it up close drives you mad. But even then, there are stories about it that don't feature either of these aspects. And people are still writing stories about it today, adding to the already rich and confusing mythology behind it. Seeing as we don't know who the original author of the story is, it's hard to say for certain what exactly inspired them, or what they truly intended Kunekune to be. Is it a yokai? Is it a spirit? Is it some other type of unknown cryptid? This lack of information is undoubtedly by design, because all good creepypastas leave you wanting more, and this one does well not to spell out every bit of information regarding its main monster. But what do you guys think Kunekune really is? Why has it become such an enduring legend nearly 20 years later that we still don't fully understand? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time. Inunaki Ridge, Inunaki Tunnel, Inunaki Village. Inunaki has been in the news a lot recently, and these places have once again sprung to the forefront of people's consciousness. There have been video games and movies made about the area, and these, in turn, have sent even more people back to check out the real locations they were based on. Perhaps the most famous of these locations is the infamous village said to exist outside the Japanese constitution. A village so terrifying, so violent, that any who enter never leave it. But is Inunaki Village a real place? And if so, where is it? What happened there to turn it into such an enduring, terrifying urban legend? Let's take a look. Inunaki Ridge is, of course, a real place. You can find it towards the top of Kyushu, northeast of Fukuoka City. It's also here that you can find Old Inunaki Tunnel, one of the most famous ghost spots in the entire country. The story behind the tunnel is a tragic one, and I'll leave a link in the description if you want to learn more about what went down there. But if you believe the stories, the tunnel isn't the only haunted location nearby. Even worse than the now closed and abandoned tunnel is the nearby village. This village obeys no law but its own. Even the Japanese authorities avoid it and leave the people to govern themselves. But is this true? And if so, where exactly is this village? According to the legend, to reach Inunaki Village, you must first take a small side road past Old Inunaki Tunnel. This path is incredibly small and easy to miss, so most people struggle to find it to begin with. Once you've found it, follow that path all the way to the entrance of the village. There, you'll find a sign that states, "The Japanese Constitution is not in effect past here." Once you see that sign, you'll know you found it. But that's not all. Past the sign, you'll see an old, broken-down sedan, left abandoned by a couple who found the village long ago and, unfortunately, were never able to leave. The village is said to be full of traps designed to kill and maim, and if you happen to stumble across the villagers themselves, they will attack you in a murderous rage with their hatchets and sickles. The sign did warn you, after all. Inunaki Village is a lawless land, and it's filled with people who were born and grew up outside of civilization. They can, and will, kill you on sight. According to the rumors, the village was isolated and cut off from the outside world during the Edo period. While the rest of Japan was forced open and began modernizing, Inunaki Village remained isolated, continuing their way of life and, due to their small population, even carrying out incest to keep their numbers alive. So much time had passed that the government supposedly decided to leave them be and treated the village as a special reservation, meaning they wouldn't interfere in what went on there. If you were foolish enough to continue past the sign warning you that the Constitution was no longer in effect, then you were entirely on your own. But is it true? Does this lawless village really exist? There's a lot of concrete information for a place that may or may not even be real. A place that supposedly claims all who enter it. So where does the truth lie? First things first, a real Inunaki village did exist long ago. In 1889, it merged with the nearby Yoshikawa village, which over the years then merged with other nearby villages. And that area is now in Miyawaka City, not too far from Inunaki Ridge. The exact site of the old Inunaki village has since been submerged thanks to the construction of the Inunaki Dam in 1994, however. So no, this isn't the Inunaki village that people speak of today, because what's left of that village is now entirely underwater. Then what about the village of the legends? Where can we find that? The directions in the legend are pretty straightforward after all. Follow the small path along Old Inunaki Tunnel, and you'll find it at the end. The problem with that is that there isn't a small path you can follow. And in this era of Google Maps, you can even search the area for yourself. There's nothing out there but forest and mountains. but the village might be hiding under the trees, I hear you saying. Well, aside from the fact that the legend literally states that the village is an open area and you can find an old car in that wide open space, something you can easily see with Google Maps, there's something else that lets us know that this village is nothing more than a story. The legend originated from the internet. In late 1999, Japanese TV channel NTV were taking user-submitted requests for mysterious stories and locations around Japan. The following story was submitted to their website by Anonymous, with the title, "The Village in Japan That Isn't Part of Japan." There's a famous ghost spot in my hometown of Inunaki Ridge in Fukuoka Prefecture. I don't believe in ghosts at all, but even putting that aside, this place is really strange. There's a small path you can easily miss to the side of a particular tunnel in Inunaki Ridge. As you climb that path, it will gradually get smaller. But when you reach the end, you'll come across a village that you won't find on any map. There's a sign on the way that states, "The Japanese Constitution is not in effect past this point." One night, one of my friends wanted to go there, and he found a prefab hut at the entrance to the village. He stopped the car suddenly, and while he was looking at the hut, 4 or 5 men gathered around him, and they were looking right at him with pissed off looks on their faces. They approached the car with incredible speed. "Shit," he thought. My friend panicked and tried to turn around. The entrance to the village widened enough to allow a U-turn. But then, the back of his car was destroyed with hatchets. Another friend of mine tried to go there during the day. The village was empty. There were several run-down wooden houses with beat-up doors, and there was a wide open space with a mangled white car in the middle. It had a Shimane Prefecture number plate. Come to think of it, didn't a couple from Shimane go missing around here a while back? Another strange thing is that, regardless of your provider, all cell phones go out of range in the area. My phone has done the same. And while it's unconfirmed, I heard that if you try to dial the police from the public phone at a nearby convenience store, it doesn't work. I heard from someone that the police and government aren't allowed to interfere in the area. It's some sort of protected space? I mean, yeah, despite being a famous spot around here, the TV stations never go past the ridge to film anything. According to one rumor, the village suffered terrible discrimination in the Edo period and cut themselves off from the outside world. That village alone has become self-sufficient, and because there aren't many females, they partake in incest with close family members over and over. There are stories that they're genetically messed up, but that's just speculation, really. My hope is that you can look into this as soon as possible. Recently, the number of kids looking for the place as a joke has increased dramatically. While the story didn't originate on Nichan, once this particular request to NTV was shared there, the lid got blown right off. Other users in the thread commented that they'd never heard such rumors before and how impossible it was for such a village to exist in the first place. Even before Google Maps, people pointed out that such a village existing outside Japanese laws was impossible. After all, during the war, soldiers were conscripted even from the most far-flung and hidden villages. No one was able to escape. And Toyotomi Hideyoshi conducted a nationwide land survey in 1582 that covered every square inch of Japan for taxation purposes. And if there's one thing that you can believe, it's that the government will take as much tax as it can get. It was, as users pointed out, more likely that Ishi, the lake monster of Lake Ikeda, or Tsuchinoko existed than this hidden Inunaki village. By this point, Inunaki Ridge had already developed a reputation as a ghost spot. The incident at the old tunnel took place in December 1988, and it wasn't too long after that that rumors began to spread about it being haunted. Yet it took another decade for the legend of Inunaki village to be born, all thanks to one person's anonymous online letter to a TV station. It was, in essence, one of the very first Japanese internet creepypastas. The story was copied and pasted over and over, and it didn't take long before it took on a life of its own. Many of the details from this letter became the facts of this village. The small path, the sign, the old car, the angry villagers, phones not working, etc., etc. These things have never changed, and yet despite growing technologies, people refuse to give up on the idea that this lawless village exists somewhere out there. Even if we set the creepypasta aside and assume for a moment that, yes, there's a hidden village out there that few people have ever found, and nearly all who did, died. It's just not possible. In this age of satellites covering every part of the globe, where you can go and scour Google Maps yourself right now and see that there's nothing out there but trees. In this age of YouTubers and streamers with cameras and drones, many of which have scoured Inunaki Ridge meticulously themselves, looking for this village and yet turned up nothing. You can believe that if any of them actually found it, it would be everywhere. No one wants to miss out on being the first person to officially uncover an urban legend with real, solid, tangible proof. And is it really believable that the Japanese government would just shrug their shoulders and let a village exist on their land, outside their jurisdiction, not paying any taxes, just because, well, they've got sickles, we better leave them alone to do what they want? The legend of Inunaki Village is nothing more than a creepypasta that gained fame on 2channel back before the turn of the millennium. Yet, the idea was so compelling that it was shared over and over without a source, to the point that there are adults hearing the story now who weren't even born when it was first shared. Its origins can quite easily be traced, but that's not the fun part for people. The fun part is in imagining that it's still out there, that they might be the first person after all these years to finally discover it. The stories are far more interesting than the truth, and that's why the legend persists to this day. Not because people really believe in it, but because it's more interesting than the alternative. A world without mystery is a world without fun. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time. Ningen. The word in Japanese means human, but in recent years, it has also come to be associated with something else. A popular cryptid born out of the 2channel forums. It all started in 2002. On May 11th, a user going by the name Baito-kun, meaning a part-time worker, posted the following. If you're already familiar with the Ningen creepypasta, then feel free to skip ahead to the next section. The Japanese government carries out whaling research in the Antarctic, but they don't only capture whales to investigate. They apparently research and record some without capturing them as well. While carrying out this research, they apparently came across something several years back that they couldn't reveal to the public. I heard this directly from the source. The researchers involved nicknamed it the human-like creature. There are apparently several types. One that looks like a human with limbs. One that looks like two human upper torsos joined together, etc. There are all different sorts, and they appear in the water just like whales. Their bodies are completely white and measure dozens of meters in length. Apparently nobody had ever seen any before the whaling trips several years back. If they revealed this information to the public, then all of their whaling research until that point would have been questioned and turned on its head, so they were extremely bewildered. Although they've been keeping records, they apparently haven't been setting out on purpose to find them. They have to submit their schedules to the international committee, so they're unable to deviate from that. You can tell other people about it, as long as you make it seem like it's just idle gossip. But whatever you do, don't say you heard it from me. Anyway, I think all the other guys have probably spoken about it as well, my source said. I didn't think it was alive. At first, I thought it was a submarine from somewhere, he continued. They don't approach ships, and if you try to get close, they dive down and swim away. But if you enlarge the pictures taken of them, you can see their faces seem smooth and flat, although they don't appear to be man-made. It might sound strange or like a fake story, but the details were so intricate that I listened as hard as I could. I think it's probably a kami-sama or something like that, he said. Setting aside the authenticity of the story, I really did hear it from him. That's not a joke. If there's anyone else out there who's also heard this story, please let me know. They apparently appear during summer, Japanese winter, and mostly at night. I remembered hearing that. Yet they don't carry out whaling research at night, so the person on duty has to wake the others up if they appear. If you take a photo of them, they just look like ice, or icebergs, floating in the water. They apparently can't get photos of them up close, and they're absolutely not allowed to release any of their photos taken while out researching anyway, apparently as a way of dealing with Greenpeace. The cameraman accompanying them on their research had apparently tried his best to get photos, but he wasn't able to get any good ones. Maybe he tried night cameras and infrared film, I don't know. I was thinking that the person who told me this story, I'll call him F-san hereafter, was maybe just making fun of me, but the details are oddly distinct, so it really grabbed my attention. F-san's back out on the ocean again. 3 days ago he got back on the boat, so they probably set out yesterday. So I won't be able to ask him anything for a while now. I'll write just a little more about what I heard. F-san told me this story the other morning, as I drove him back towards the boat. Odoru Dame Ningen by Kinniku Shoujo Tai was playing on the car radio, with the lyrics Dame Dame Dame, Dame Ningen, Ningen Ningen. Upon hearing that, F-san went, Ningen, Ningen. Huh. On that note, I bet you didn't know there are Ningen, people, in Antarctica. Huh? People? You mean the wintering teams? No, Ningen. I don't know if they're people, but there are strange creatures down there that we call Ningen. According to F-san's story, they first saw them about 10 years ago. It was quite a while until they saw one again, but apparently it was the talk of the town. They were so taken aback that they didn't report it to any of the organizations above them. Then one of the scientists on board said, "Well, I don't know what it is, but why don't we at least collect the sightings of it?" Then they discovered that numerous people had seen them. The scientists were so happy. At first they were calling it Object X. Apparently none of the veteran whalers, before whaling had been made illegal, ever saw them, but in the last few years, they've become a hot topic. We'll probably hear about it on TV or something soon. But the authenticity of such a scientific study would probably come into doubt, so they said not to post about it while at work on any strange places. I think those strange places were probably referring to Nichan, where I'm writing now. 2 or 3 years back, we received an informal report that said, from here on out, they will be referred to as human-shaped objects. So apparently in Japanese, it's not read as Jinkei Buttai or Ningyo Buttai. The correct reading of the term is Hitogata Buttai, but we just call them Ningen. F-san said. And apparently, there are so many more whales in the Antarctic than we could ever imagine, and those numbers are growing by the year. Apparently there are so many that it's like they're going to fill up the entire ocean, and even though they know there are multiple times the numbers officially given, apparently the environmental groups and international organizations will only recognize the minimum number. So, for some reason, F-san got really angry, saying, "There are too many whales now, so that's why we're seeing these strange things out there." Sorry this is a bit late, but I was able to talk to F-san again. We didn't have much time, so we weren't able to speak much, but I was able to get some new information from him. Apparently the Ningen have eyes and mouths. They have 2 eyes and a black hole for a mouth, but they weren't able to see if they had a nose or anything like that. Because they have what looks like eyes and a mouth, they must be alive. But their bodies are massive and shine white like something inorganic. Still, their eyes apparently looked right at them. That's about it for all the new stuff. And I asked him about Evangelion, but he was just like, huh? So, judging by his reaction, I'd say he doesn't know anything about that. If I get the chance to see him again soon, I'll come back and let you guys know. Basically, the Ningen are somewhat humanoid creatures that reside in Antarctica. They're mostly seen in the water, and they're massive, the size of whales, with shining white skin and, at the very least, eyes and a mouth. The original poster blames their existence on too many whales in the ocean, which doesn't really make a lot of sense no matter how you look at it. But there you go. So, are these cryptids real? If so, what are they? After this story of the Ningen was shared on 2channel, the Japanese occult magazine Mu picked up on it. Then they spread the story to the masses. It got so popular that it even reached overseas, and you can find all sorts of pages in English talking about it as well. 2channel is of course no stranger to starting modern urban legends, and many have come from there over the years. Ningen is no different, although it may be the first cryptid to spring to life from the boards. Numerous explanations have been given over the years for what this large white creature could be. Maybe it's a large sea turtle. Perhaps it's a whale carcass or blubber. Or it might be nothing more than a chunk of ice that happens to look vaguely humanoid in shape. Over time, various photoshops started to appear of the creature online, and some even claim to have found the creature floating off the coast of Namibia in Google Maps. This particular image is from well over a decade ago, so it's no longer visible on the current Google Maps, but the white section measured roughly 20 meters in length, which fits the size that the Ningen is supposed to be. There were initially suggestions that the creature was nothing more than a ripoff of Adam from Evangelion, who appears as a large white humanoid creature. The creepypasta itself even makes mention of this, perhaps to throw the heat off from claims that the story was merely copying a far more popular anime. Whether or not Evangelion inspired the story is unknown, but it's a possibility. There were also claims it might have been an umibozu, a Japanese yokai who appears in the oceans much like Ningen, but it's black rather than white. Perhaps this white version was an Antarctic counterpart to the traditional black Japanese umibozu. Like pretty much every other cryptid before it, no one has ever been able to give definitive proof that it exists. The fact that it emerged from the 2channel occult forums should be enough to let you know that the tale wasn't true to begin with. But once it got picked up by the occult magazine Mu a few years later, the creepypasta was somewhat legitimized in the eyes of the public. Was the creature inspired by a popular anime? Was the story itself the poster's way of fighting back against Japan being punished for whaling? This angle is little touched upon in the West, but the poster mentions quite staunchly that, according to his source, there are too many whales in the sea, far more than the official numbers claim, and he hints that it's because of this supposed surplus of whales that the Ningen have started to appear. It's possible this creepypasta was attempting to legitimize Japanese whaling. Japan has long been under fire for hunting whales for research purposes, while still serving whale flesh in restaurants today. Perhaps by claiming that the sea was actually full of whales, and their actual overpopulation was causing some strange creatures to appear, that would make hunting them okay again, because hey, you're just clearing out the monsters and there are plenty of them to go around anyway. There have certainly been stranger arguments on 2channel before, so it's a possibility, however slim. In the end, the Ningen creepypasta was one of the lucky few that got picked up by the mainstream media and then spread to the West. Whether you believe in cryptids or not is up to you, but the tale is undoubtedly little more than a 2channel creepypasta that just got lucky, rather than some startling revelation of the Japanese government hiding the existence of unknown creatures. Still, it makes for a good story either way. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time. Hasshaku-sama, the 8-foot tall woman. If you're here on this channel, you've no doubt at least heard of her. She's one of the most famous creepypastas to have come out of 2channel since its inception, and has since grown into an independent urban legend in her own right, featured in all sorts of media from video games to manga to even anime. But who or what is she, and how did her story come into being? If you're not familiar with her story, I'll leave a link in the comments where you can listen to the full thing, but to very quickly sum it up, it first appeared on 2channel in 2008, where the anonymous poster claimed to visit his grandparents in the countryside one summer. While there, he saw an incredibly tall woman who looked to be over 2 meters tall and wearing a white dress with a white hat on. This woman had a strange laugh that sounded like po po po, and when he told his grandparents about it, they freaked out. He was locked in a bedroom protected with various charms overnight and told not to come out, no matter what he heard. He survives until morning, only to find numerous male relatives have arrived to usher him out of town. He survived, but this woman, Hasshaku-sama, as they call her, now has her sights set on him, and he can never return. They're able to safely get him out, but years down the track he gets a call saying that the statues keeping Hasshaku-sama bound to the village have broken. She's on her way to find him once more. Within the story, several key points are brought up about who or what Hasshaku-sama is. Although she appears as a young woman in a white dress and hat to the boy, that's not the only form that she's known to take. Sometimes she appears as a woman in a mourning dress, sometimes an old lady in a kimono, or sometimes a middle-aged woman in farm clothes. There are 3 things, however, that distinguish her regardless of how she appears. She is always incredibly tall, she always wears something on her head, and she always has that strange po 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 laugh. Nobody is quite sure what, exactly, Hasshaku-sama is. Is she a spirit? A kami? A yokai? No one knows, but there were rumors that she was once a possessed traveller who was just passing through the village she's now trapped in. She was sealed in the village by various Jizo statues placed at strategic exits at each of the compass points in town, certain paths that Hasshaku-sama could, for some unknown reason, only pass through. Now, why would you want to keep something as dangerous as Hasshaku-sama trapped in your own city? After all, the story states that once she has her eyes set on someone, and she seems to like young men and children in particular, they end up dying within a few days. She appears somewhat regularly, although by the time the story takes place, the last time anyone saw her was 15 years earlier. Why would you want to keep that trapped in your village? As it turned out, it was a simple arrangement made long ago. The village accepted Hasshaku-sama because doing so gave them water rights that they desperately needed to live. She only appeared once roughly every 10 years, so it was a deal too good to pass up. What's the loss of one person every decade when the rest of the village is able to sustain itself, right? Little else is explained about how Hasshaku-sama came into being or how they knew how to trap her, but this is the history we're given from the story. Once she sets her sights on someone, Hasshaku-sama will do whatever it takes to claim them. She's able to mimic voices, which she does with the boy's grandfather in the story, trying to lure him from his warded room. He realizes at the last moment what's going on, but many others aren't so lucky, and she has apparently claimed numerous lives over the years. It's indicated that once she has set her sights on someone, she's able to, in a way, track them genetically. Again, it isn't explained how, but the boy's final getaway in the end is successful because they invite all of the men in his family who live nearby to help confuse her. With the boy bundled away in the car and his relatives spread out across several vehicles, she's not sure exactly which one is him until she gets up close. After escaping, the boy hears from his father that one of his friends was killed by Hasshaku-sama when he was a boy, and several people had to move away from the village never to return as well. People have escaped her grasp before, but it's not easily done, and it means never coming back again. The boy even ended up missing his grandfather's funeral because he wasn't able to return to the village for it. In the end, however, he gets that fateful call that one of the Jizo statues has broken, and it's the one that leads towards where he lives. Somehow, Hasshaku-sama found a way to escape, and now she could be anywhere in Japan, free to kill children and young men all over the country. Once she's done with the narrator, who will be next? Nobody knows, and that's part of what made the story stand out so much at the time. It was creative. It was terrifying. It relied on unsettling imagery and a threat so powerful that once she sets her sights on you, you can't ever escape. Ever. But is she real? Of course she's not. Like numerous urban legends before her, Hasshaku-sama was created merely as a scary story. She was posted during the height of 2channel's scary story boom, when everyone was getting in on the act and trying to create the next big hit. 2channel is of course anonymous, which makes it the perfect breeding ground for urban legends. A story can very quickly spread, and while losing particular details, still pick up enough steam if it has enough distinctive aspects for readers to lock onto. And Hasshaku-sama has all of the elements necessary to become an urban legend. She has a very particular and distinctive look. She's nearly 2.5 meters tall and wears a white dress with a white hat. This makes it easy for readers to imagine her, and easy for artists to draw her. Just like Kuchisake Onna is known for her distinctive cut mouth, or Teke Teke is known for having no lower body, it's a unique image that people could latch onto and immediately recognize upon seeing. Her distinctive laugh, po po po, also adds a little something extra, similar to Kuchisake Onna's question of, "Am I pretty?" Another important feature for something to become an urban legend is a method of escaping. It may not always work, but having a way to avoid danger, at least for the time being, plays a vital part in the great majority of urban legends. With Hasshaku-sama, the boy was locked in a warded room with piles of salt and told not to come out until morning, no matter who might call out to him during the night. Then, he has to get out of town, literally, and never come back. The danger is massive. Hasshaku-sama will literally kill you once she's set her sights on you, but there is a glimmer of hope, no matter how small it is. A story where you instantly die and there's no way of escape doesn't quite build the same amount of suspense as an edge-of-your-seat escape that literally changes how you must live the rest of your life. With all of those elements in place, it's no surprise Hasshaku-sama took off and become the legend she is today. Over the years, there has been a lot of discussion about where the original story may have taken place. Like many other legends, many readers decided the small village had to be somewhere in the Tohoku region, Japan's northeast. Tohoku is notorious for being a cold, rugged area with long memories and long-lived customs. It's a hard place to live, and so the people must be hard as well to survive it. All sorts of monsters and urban legends are said to come from there, so why not Hasshaku-sama as well? But is there any proof of that? Some wondered if the Hasshaku in her name, which in English can be translated to 8 shaku, with shaku being a measurement of roughly 30 centimeters, doesn't actually refer to her height, but a place instead. And there is only one place in Japan that has Hasshaku in its name. Surprise, surprise, it's in Aomori, a place called Hasshaku-do. Looking at it, it certainly looks like it could pass for the small village in the story. A few houses with lots of rice fields and forests. By all accounts, it's an idyllic countryside village that primarily deals in dairy farming and racehorse breeding. There are even people who live there with the same last name. Could the original poster have, at the very least, been inspired by this tiny countryside village? Was it a place they visited themselves as a child, perhaps visiting relatives, or they just happened to live nearby and knew of it? It's definitely a possibility, but considering that nobody knows who the original poster was, it's something that will always be up in the air. There's also a good chance that she was at least partly inspired by Taka-onna, a yokai popular during the Edo period, who was tall enough to peek into the second-floor windows of brothels. She was thought to be so ugly that no man would have her, and being a jealous woman, she enjoyed shocking those inside the rooms when they saw her. Their incredible height is the only thing they really have in common, however, so how big of an influence she was, if any, is still up for debate. Interestingly, if we head all the way down to Shikoku in Japan's south, we can find a shrine that uses the same characters for Hasshaku. This shrine is pronounced Yasaka, however, and Shikoku is also known for its fair share of yokai and supernatural stories. There's also a Yasaka shrine in Ehime that was built during the Nara period. It received the name Yasaka during the Meiji period, and the source of that name came from one of Japan's 3 sacred treasures, the Yasakani no Magatama. Now, while both of these use the same characters, it's unlikely that they had too much influence on the story we know today. Despite her somewhat humble beginnings as an anonymous creepypasta on 2channel, Hasshaku-sama has become so famous that her reach now extends to the general public as well. She might not be as famous as the likes of Kuchisake Onna, but as more and more time goes on, more and more people have their own Hasshaku-sama stories to share. One of those is comedian Yoshida Yuri, known by her comedian name of Yurian Retriever. She once shared a story about riding her bike through Namba in Osaka one night on her way to a flower viewing party. As she got near the park, she noticed a lone woman jumping up and down on the spot behind a slide, muttering something that wasn't really a song, but not really understandable words either. She continued past her to buy some snacks at the shops, and when she returned, the woman was gone. She mentioned it to her friends who were waiting at the park, but none of them had seen this woman. According to them, she was never there to begin with. When one of the men stood near the slide, she realized just how tall that woman that only she had seen had been. The man was 180 centimeters tall, and the slide was higher than his head. Yet, that same slide only reached the woman's shoulders, meaning she was well over 2 meters tall. Not only that, but she was wearing a white dress. Sound familiar? Yurian Retriever started her career long after Hasshaku-sama was posted on 2channel, so there's a good chance that what she saw, if she indeed did see it and it wasn't just an anecdote to stir up a little conversation, was at least partly influenced by the burgeoning urban legend. In 2012, yet another anonymous story was shared on 2channel that featured 3 men out for a drive in Fukushima. According to the poster, what looked like a tanuki ran out onto the road and they swerved, colliding with a Jizo statue on the side of the road. Almost immediately, an incredibly tall woman came speeding past them, smiling and saying, "Thank you," as she ran past the car from behind them. This story was undoubtedly trying to add itself into the legend, offering an explanation for how the Jizo statue broke in the first place, and even giving a more definitive location for the story. But 2channel is notorious for people trying to insert themselves into famous stories, so whether you really want to believe it or not is up to you. Ever since the story got big, you can find all sorts of eyewitness accounts on the internet from people who claim to have really seen her. These seem especially prominent in the Tohoku region, once again, with reports of people seeing a woman over 2 meters tall standing in a residential parking lot, walking behind tall fences, and so on. There were also reportedly so many sightings in Ibaraki Prefecture at one point that, much like Kuchisake Onna, the police and schools had to issue a warning about approaching this incredibly tall woman that people had reportedly seen lurking in the area. Hasshaku-sama has also spawned many copycats, with Akusara perhaps being the most famous of all. Her full name is Acrobatic Sarasara, with Sarasara being a word commonly used to describe silky hair, which she apparently has, and acrobatic coming from her style of movement. She's commonly seen on rooftops and high places, perhaps thanks to her acrobatic nature. And depending on who you talk to, she may also be missing her eyes and have a slit mouth as well. And, like Hasshaku-sama, once she sets her sights on you, it's all over. She'll pursue you until death. Your death. She's basically a mix of Hasshaku-sama and Kuchisake Onna, which makes her quite popular as well. Whether she really is Hasshaku-sama or an entirely different entity is up for debate though. As mentioned earlier, Hasshaku-sama's white dress is only one of many appearances she has, so Akusara might actually be her in a different outfit. Or she could be someone different entirely. That part is still debated. At the end of the day, Hasshaku-sama was in the right place at the right time, and that's what helped turn her from an anonymous story posted on 2channel to the urban legend that she is today. All of the elements within the story were in place, and the timing of the post during the height of the occult boom on 2channel made her, no pun intended, rise above the rest to become a legend in her own right. What she was inspired by, if anything, is still up for debate, and where she came from has also been the subject of much discussion. But it's the enduring mystery that keeps people coming back for more. It's not a mystery that's likely to ever be fully solved. It is, after all, just an anonymous internet creepypasta. But what do you guys think? What has been your favourite Hasshaku-sama appearance so far? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time. On yesterday's episode of Kawabana, we featured the 2channel classic story of Ryomen Sukuna, the story shared back in 2005 that quickly went on to become a fan favourite. People still talk about it today, and many even credit the story with bringing about a surge in popularity for the mythological Ryomen Sukuna as well. Now, being 2channel, the story was presented as a true story, something that really happened to the anonymous poster. Whether you choose to believe this right off the bat or not is up to you, but today we're going to take a look at what evidence is available out there and try to determine whether, yes, Ryomen Sukuna, as told of on 2channel, could potentially have been a true story. Let's dig in. As I just mentioned, Ryomen Sukuna is an actual mythological figure. you can find him mentioned in the Nihon Shoki, the Chronicles of Japan, and he's described as having 4 arms, 4 legs, 2 heads but no neck. He's said to have lived during the 4th or 5th century, during the reign of Emperor Nintoku, and he's portrayed as a villainous character to go with his horrific form. Yet, in the Hida and Mino regions, modern-day Gifu Prefecture, Ryomen Sukuna was actually seen as a hero. Despite his monstrous visage, he was an Oni slayer, and this is reflected in his name. The final kanji, Na, is a character that means to drive away evil spirits. He wasn't the bad guy. He slayed the bad guys. Just like his name, it seemed that Ryomen Sukuna had 2 sides to him, depending on who you spoke to. So that's the historical figure. But what about the one mentioned in the 2channel story? If you haven't read it before, or you haven't yet listened to yesterday's episode, I recommend going and checking that out first, because that will help everything that's coming up make sense. In short, this Ryomen Sukuna is the mummy of a deformed child from the early Taisho period. This mummy was created by a cult through the method of kodoku. Traditionally, kodoku is a form of poisonous magic from Japanese folklore where a sorcerer would place a bunch of insects in a jar, then let them fight it out until only one remained. This insect was the winner, and thus the strongest of the bunch. This survivor could then be used to create a poison for someone you wish to kill, or, in some cases, kept and fed and used as a good luck charm. In Ryomen Sukuna's case, the kodoku ritual was carried out with people and not insects. The cult gathered a bunch of, in their words, deformed people, locked them in a room, and the deformed child, believed to be conjoined twins, was the winner. If you really want to call them that. It's believed that the leader of the cult, Mononobe Tengoku, conspired to make sure that the conjoined twins would win because their visage reminded him of Ashura, a Buddhist demigod said to have 3 heads and 4 or 6 arms. After winning, the conjoined twins were immediately locked in a room and starved to death. The body was then embalmed and mummified and used to carry out the cult's plan. And what was that plan? Mononobe wished to destroy Japan. Why? The story mentions he filled Ryomen Sukuna's belly with bones of the ancients, a group of people that were destroyed by the Yamato, and therefore considered to be traitors to the nation of Japan. It's insinuated that the cult descends from these people, or at least believed them to be the rightful rulers of Japan. Either way, the cult founder, Mononobe, also not a full-blooded Japanese person, decided that now was the time to take revenge for them, and the cult used Ryomen Sukuna as an object of worship and travelled the country. Wherever they went, disaster soon followed. Several of these real-life disasters are listed in the tale, and it ends when Mononobe finally takes his own life the day before the Great Kanto earthquake. His final action is to write a message in his own blood. Japan must be destroyed. After that, the mummy of Ryomen Sukuna seemingly goes missing. At some point, he ends up in a sealed box at a temple in Iwate Prefecture, which is where the story begins, and several construction workers die simply by opening the box. It appears that at least one chief priest knew exactly who and what Ryomen Sukuna was, and by the time the box was opened at the start of the story, there were plans to move it to Kyoto that never got carried out because of a former priest's carelessness. Touching the mummy is guaranteed death, and even simply looking at it will greatly shorten one's lifespan. So, the Ryomen Sukuna curse is still in full effect, and the box must be protected at all costs. If not, then this great disaster that Mononobe was after his hope to destroy Japan once and for all, might finally be carried out. This aspect of the story is somewhat similar to Kankandara, which came out several years later. The danger is moved around the country, and when the story finishes, you don't know where it might be. It could be at a temple near you, and just looking upon it will be enough to curse you. It's frightening, for sure. But is it real? Let's take a look at some of the disasters that Ryomen Sukuna is said to have caused, the only solid information we're given in the story. We're given a list of 8 disasters that took place in Japan from 1914 to 1923, starting with the Sakurajima eruption and ending with the Great Kanto earthquake. 5 of these are natural disasters, 2 are coal mine explosions, and 1 is a large-scale fire. There's obviously no way to prove one way or the other whether Ryomen Sukuna might have caused the natural disasters, so let's take a look at the others. First, 2 coal mine explosions are mentioned as being Ryomen Sukuna's work. The Hojo coal mine explosion of 1914 that killed 687, and the Kirino coal mine explosion of 1917 that killed 361. First thing to note is that coal mine explosions were sadly not rare in the early Taisho period. They happened quite frequently, and yes, many people often died. In the case of the Hojo mine, human error was to blame. It's believed that someone left the ventilation shaft open, which let out methane gas, and when a worker went down with his safety lamp, it caught fire and went boom. The cause of the Kirino mine explosion was never uncovered, but it was believed that the coal bed was full of dangerous locations that could have easily ignited and caused the massive explosion that killed 369 people. And then there's the Hakodate fire of 1916. This is the only disaster the story doesn't give us a casualty number for, but over 1,700 buildings were burnt during this fire, so it's safe to assume there was quite a bit of damage. The problem with Ryomen Sukuna being the cause of this fire is that, well, Hakodate has been on fire a lot since the 1800s. The layout of the city, as well as its windy location, meant that whenever a small fire broke out, it usually didn't remain small for long, and the wind would swiftly carry it to nearby buildings that then led to much of the city going up in flames. Hakodate was on fire at least 2 other times during the Taisho period, numerous times in the Meiji period before it, and then yet another massive fire in the Showa period after. Hakodate burns easily. It doesn't really need Ryomen Sukuna's help. There's also one more interesting thing to note here. Something that makes it difficult to believe that Ryomen Sukuna could have been a real cursed mummy. The list of tragedies is a near exact copy and paste of a list of Taisho disasters from a website published several years before the story came out. The only addition is the Great Kanto earthquake at the end, and you can even see that the number of casualties and deaths after the Hakodate fire is left blank, just like in the original source. So what does this mean? Well, it's likely that the list of disasters that Ryomen Sukuna supposedly caused is nothing but a copy and paste from the Nagaoka Red Cross page that was published several years earlier. This list was taken and injected into the story, not even modified, to add some authenticity to the tale. Japanese readers would no doubt immediately recognize most of these disasters, but if not, a quick search would bring up that, yes, this coal mine explosion really happened, and yes, this fire really took place during this particular year. If you were reading the story and on the fence about whether it might be true or not, finding out that these events were real events might help tip you over. Regardless of what you believe in, Ryomen Sukuna is undoubtedly just a story that took real Japanese mythology and real events from history and worked those into a terrifying tale of a curse so strong that it survived until modern times. And it could even be lurking somewhere near you right now. It's a well-crafted tale in many aspects, and many people even credit it with bringing the mythological figure into the limelight in modern times. But is it real? Not likely. But what do you guys think about this one? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time. When you think of famous creepypastas that have come out of 2chan over the years, several stories probably come to mind. Hasshaku-sama, Kisaragi Station, Kunekune, and no doubt, Kankandara. But if you're unaware of Kankandara, don't worry. Today we're going to be taking a look at who she is, how she came to be, whether she might actually be real, and if so, where she could be now. It's believed the story of Kankandara was first shared on a website called Horrorteller in March 2009. This website no longer exists, and it was also shared on 2chan soon thereafter, where its popularity exploded. Also known as Naridara, or simply Dara, Kankandara is a monstrous creature, possibly even a god, found in a fixed location in the mountains or forests of Japan. This fixed spot can be and is often moved around the country, however, meaning you never know if she might be coming to your town next, or worse, if she's already there. In the story, Kankandara is described as taking the form of a woman with 6 arms, a former shrine maiden, but her lower half is unknown. It's unknown because if you see it, you go mad. Although it's most often depicted in art as being that of a snake, thanks to her origin story. The woman that would be Kankandara was, long ago, a shrine maiden, the divine child from a long line of Shinto priests and shrine maidens. A certain village was under attack by a giant snake, and so they sought her family's help to get rid of the beast. The family sent the maiden, being the strongest of them all, and when she was close to besting the beast, it clamped onto her, tearing her lower torso off and eating it. Even in this state, the maiden continued her efforts, but the villagers, seeing the tide of the battle turning, betrayed the maiden and offered her to the giant snake as a sacrifice instead. If the snake would agree to leave them alone, it could have the rest of the maiden too. This might seem like a strange exchange, considering the snake had already eaten the lower half of her body. But this maiden was supremely powerful, and it was an agreeable deal to the snake. The villagers were nothing to it, but this maiden was brimming with power that the snake wanted, so after agreeing, the villagers cut her arms off, and the snake swallowed her whole without resistance. The shrine maiden's family were understandably upset with this turn of events, so they formed a new plan. Despite the giant snake's withdrawal, villagers started dying one by one, often found missing their limbs. 12 villagers died in total. At some point, the maiden's family also disappeared, and it was never mentioned what happened to them. There were 6 of them, and the limbless shrine maiden returned with 6 arms, so perhaps they joined her angry spirit. This part is unclear, however, and never stated, so it's nothing more than a guess. Before long, only 4 villagers remained, and they made their way to the maiden's house to try and find a way to appease her righteous rage. It was there that they came up with the ritual that is still being carried out to this day. And what is that ritual? A box was created with a vase placed at each of the corners, full of liquid, this representing the 4 survivors, and in the middle, 6 toothpicks, representing the shrine maiden's family members, were placed in a very rough shape of a snake. This box would eventually be covered in the family crests of those charged with taking care of Kankandara as well. The sacred box was then placed inside an area with 6 trees and 6 pieces of rope, representing the 12 villagers who had died. The 4 remaining villagers were the first ones to take on this task, but it eventually spread to other families as well, presumably relatives or acquaintances trustworthy enough to be let in on the terrible burden. Each of these families in turn bore their own shrine maidens, and it's these maidens who are ultimately tasked with keeping Kankandara appeased today. They see her as a god, being that the giant snake that consumed her human form was also thought to be a mountain kami. Once a year, these maidens gather to perform songs, dances, and to recite Shinto prayers for her, and these same maidens are the ones who carefully select Kankandara's resting places. These are chosen with the utmost care, and must be located somewhere deep in the mountains or the forests of Japan. When setting up Kankandara's new resting place, a 2-meter high fence is erected in the shape of a hexagon. This fence is designed to keep people out, not to keep Kankandara in, and it's made with sacred rope, barbed wire, numerous bells, and shide, which is Shinto zigzag streamers. Inside that area, the box and its special seal of 6 trees with 6 ropes is also set up. It's been said that Kankandara can be seen on occasion moving around inside the barrier, or even hanging off the fence, but only if she chooses to show herself. Otherwise, people would have no idea that she's there. In this environment, Kankandara will generally appear as the shrine maiden she was, although with additional arms, which is what the protagonists in the story saw. But she also has her more fearsome and presumably snake form, which is the form she takes when she fully intends on murdering someone, rather than just playing with them. But where is Kankandara? No location is specified in the original story, and in the end, she moves to a new, unnamed location anyway. Someone once claimed the story took place in Kyushu, as they stumbled upon the site themselves, but there's never been any proof of this, and Kyushu is a pretty big place anyway. Giant snakes, of course, play an important part in Japanese mythology, and there are numerous shrines around the country dedicated to their worship. There are even snake gods, such as Ugami, who is commonly depicted as having a snake's body, and either the head of a young woman or an old man. The idea of Kankandara existing therefore isn't strange, nor that this snake god might be worshipped and moved around the country. But unlike the public and well-known shrines dedicated to snakes, Kankandara has proven much more difficult to pin down. By design, of course. The fear in the story lies in not knowing where she is, in not knowing whether she'll show up in your town next, whether you might accidentally stumble upon her while out walking in the forest or mountains one day. There have been claims that Kankandara was actually based on the tale of Kiyohime, a woman who fell in love with a monk but, when rejected, turned into a snake after death and hunted him down, eventually killing him inside a bell that he was hiding in. That story took place in Kumano Prefecture, but even if Kankandara was loosely based upon this tale, that doesn't guarantee that her story took place in the same location, and does little to help us with where she might be now. Perhaps the best lead, for lack of a better term, on Kankandara's current location stemmed from a YouTube comment on a short film made about the lady herself. This user claimed that she was now hidden on a mountain somewhere in Chiba Prefecture. Why did they think this? Because they apparently found a fenced-off area in Nagara City with a no entry sign attached. Now, this alone isn't anything to be alarmed about. Fenced-off places with no entry signs exist all around the country, even in forests and mountains. But this particular location caught their attention because it apparently looked just like the hexagon fence in the story, and had recently been upgraded with guards and security cameras, perhaps in a sign of the times. This reply was posted 2 years ago as of this video. It's never specified in the original story how often Kankandara moves around, but probably not too frequently, considering how much effort goes into choosing each location and the coordination required to move her around the country. If true, then hey, maybe she's currently residing somewhere in Chiba Prefecture. Assuming, of course, that you believe the story is true, and not just a really well-written creepypasta that many people, for their own reasons, want to believe is real. Snake worship and snake gods aren't uncommon in Shinto beliefs. It's why we get so many creepypastas featuring them, and on that front, Kankandara is just one of many. Her fascinating story captured the imagination of many, and many wanted her story to be real. After all, if you can believe that creatures like Yamata no Orochi played a part in the early stories of Japan, why couldn't Kankandara exist now? Of course, many more accept her story as nothing more than just that. A well-designed tale taking numerous aspects of Shinto beliefs and weaving them into something terrifying, both modern and old at the same time. Does Kankandara exist? Undoubtedly not, but that doesn't make her tale any less interesting or worthwhile. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time. The legend of the Kotoribako is one of my favourites to come out of 2chan over the years. I've covered this story on Kowabana before, so I'll leave a link in the comments if you want to go and check that out. But the basic premise sees a 2chan user coming across a mysterious box that has the power to curse people, women and children especially. As he and his friends unravel the mysteries behind it, they discover that it was built to, in essence, eradicate entire families, and it's a custom that's several hundreds of years old. But is there any truth to the story? It has since become one of the most famous scary stories to ever come out of 2chan, but is it all fake, or is there at least some truth to it? The Kotoribako is said to come from Shimane Prefecture, which is where I lived. According to the story, after a villager tried to cause an uprising on the island of Oki in 1868, he failed and fled to Shimane Prefecture on the mainland. He ended up in a small village that, at the time, saw mass discrimination taking place. Because these villagers were facing such harsh oppression by the people governing them, the man agreed to teach them a way to dispose of the village leadership. A curse that would eradicate them entirely. The curse of the Kotoribako. This curse isn't so immediate in English, but in Japanese it's pretty easy to infer what it is. Kotori means to take or steal children, and bako means box. A box for taking children. The man teaches the oppressed villagers how to make the boxes. There are 8 in total, with each box number representing how many children are used to make it. To make a Kotoribako, you must first build a puzzle box and fill it with the blood of a female beast. A week later, you place the lid of that box on before the blood inside it has dried up. Then you place the body part of a child up to the age of 10 inside. Generally a forefinger or umbilical cord. The more body parts you use from different kids, the stronger the curse will be. In theory, this should only be done by men. Women and children can't go near the box. It will cause them to get violently ill, vomiting blood before they die. In the story, it does exactly this to the governing family's women and children, and the villagers realize the man from Oki was indeed telling them the truth. He taught them a terrifying curse, but before he left, he warned them never to make a hakkai, a Kotoribako with 8 children inside. He never tells them why, only warns them not to do it. The Oki Rebellion mentioned in the story was a real event, taking place in 1868, as mentioned. To make a long and complicated story very short, the islanders living on Oki were unhappy with how they were being governed by the mainland, and they wished to govern themselves. After much fighting, order was restored, but it's from this rebellion that the Kotoribako story spins off, seeing an islander from Oki fleeing to the mainland and ending up somewhere in what is now Shimane Prefecture. Now, it's obviously impossible one way or the other to determine whether this man ever existed, but there is some interesting evidence to back up the story of the cursed box. The story of Kotoribako was posted to 2channel in 2005. Only 1 year later, in 2006, reports broke out that a certain unnamed shrine in Shimane found a mysterious box in their storehouse when it was torn down for renovations. It looked just like a puzzle box, and instantly people started to whisper that it might be the Kotoribako. Yet, somebody supposedly took the box home, perhaps because of its interesting design, and it disappeared. No one knows where it is now, or so the story goes. I was unable to find any news confirming this story ever really took place, although you can find numerous articles claiming that it did, so take it with a grain of salt. The village where the original story took place can supposedly be found in the north of Shimane Prefecture as well. This would make sense, because if the man was fleeing Oki, this is likely where he'd first end up, and the story mentions the village being located in the mountains, which you can find plenty of in North Shimane. The villagers ended up making 16 boxes over the 13 years following the man's arrival, many of which were later collected by Shinto priests in the area for safekeeping, while a few of the families involved kept them on a rotation until their powers diminished, which is how the 2channel user's friend apparently found one in the story. If so, does that mean the puzzle box supposedly found in Shimane a year after the story was posted was from one of the shrines keeping them safe? It certainly seems like a possibility, but if we take the story at face value, the priests looking after the boxes know how powerful they are and also how to deal with them. Unless a box got lost along the way, it seems odd one would show up and nobody at the shrine would have any idea what it was. And that's if this box even existed in the first place. And as for the story itself, several points have been brought up over the years criticizing its veracity. First of all, there are no mentions in any historical documents anywhere in Shimane's history that mention such a puzzle box. Anywhere. There's no mention in records, even from tiny villages way out in the middle of nowhere, of the village leaders losing their entire families to mysterious illnesses or anything of the sort. Others have also criticized the way the story pretty much ignores that one of the characters' mothers touched the box and it had no effect on her. It's brushed away as maybe she's going through menopause, but it seems like an oversight that the 2channel user didn't put much thought into. If the Kotoribako was really as powerful as it's claimed to be in the story, then she should have died, or at the very least, gotten violently ill. Yet, nothing ever happened to her. Nobody even seems worried that she handled this box they've just learnt kills women and children. The author of the story also makes a mistake with the numbers given for the number of children sacrificed and the number of boxes made, which other users in the thread immediately called them out on. Now, this could be explained as a simple typo, or perhaps the user wasn't thinking about the numbers so much, but it slightly takes away from the story's credibility. Is the Kotoribako real? Was the story posted to 2channel real? Both seem unlikely. There have been rumors over the years of real Kotoribakos potentially being found in shrines in Shimane, but there is no evidence that this is anything other than a story as well. The original post gives us all sorts of information and locations from history, and yet nothing has ever been found anywhere that even hints that any of the events could have taken place. No puzzle boxes, no weird deaths, nothing. At best, it's likely that Kotoribako was a fabricated story for Nichan that took real places and events and crafted a terrifying story around them. The fact that the user posted parts of the story in real time, over several days, helped add authenticity at the time, but it was hardly a unique idea, even at the time. Could a real Kotoribako exist somewhere out there? As they say, anything's possible, but based on the evidence we have on hand, it's unlikely. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time. In February 2006, a Nichan user shared the following story. A few years back, I suddenly remembered something about a certain village. This was a village with a small ryokan I stayed in while traveling alone. Their thoughtful hospitality was truly impressive, and for some reason, I wanted to go back there again immediately. I took a few days off and got in the car. I have a good memory, so I remembered the roads to get there. There was a sign indicating the location as I approached the village, but when I found it, I was confused. Rather than saying how many kilometers ahead, it said Kyoto O, Big Head O. I was filled with both a sense of dread and curiosity, and in the end, decided to keep going. I entered the village and saw it was abandoned. Grass was growing up through the cracks in the buildings. I went to get out of the car, but then a person with a rather large head approached me from a clump of bushes about 20 meters away. Huh? What the hell? I thought. They were all around me. Not only that, but they ran at me with this really creepy movement. They put both hands precisely on their legs, and their huge heads swayed from left to right as they ran. Thank God I didn't get out of the car. I reversed with incredible speed and sped out of town as fast as I could. I looked at the map when I got home, and it was definitely the same village I went to years earlier. Even so, I don't think I want to go there again. It was certainly a strange story. This person visited a small village a few years earlier and stayed in a Japanese inn while there. One day they suddenly remembered that village and how much fun they had there, so they decided to go back. Only this time, the village was nothing like they remembered. There was a strange sign that said Big Head O on it, and the apparently abandoned village was full of creatures with massive heads that attacked the car on sight. Who were these people, if they even were people? And where was this village? What had gone on there? And perhaps most importantly, was any of it real? The first mystery behind this story is what the O means. It's given as the katakana character for the sound O, which alone has no meaning. It's simply a sound. So what does it mean, if anything? Numerous theories have been given over the years, with two standing out above the rest. The first is that the O was actually once the character for village that faded away, leaving what looked like the katakana character for O. This would make sense, as the Nichan user mentioned seeing this on a sign while heading in. Big Head Village. A village full of creatures with big heads. It all fits. Another theory is that perhaps it was actually an arrow. It's possible that, in passing, the user mistook an arrow for the katakana character for O, and it was in fact pointing the way in for the big-headed creatures. To this day, nobody is quite sure, but either of these is likely a good guess. With that out of the way, how about the village itself? Does it actually exist, and if so, where can we find it? Numerous people have tried to track down the location of this village full of big-headed creatures over the years, without much luck. There's nothing in the story that gives any clue whatsoever as to where it may be. With Sugisawa village, we know that it's supposed to be in Aomori somewhere. With Inunaki village, we know it's supposed to be near the tunnel. With this one, we have nothing. The user gives no information other than a village with a Japanese inn, which is just about every village in Japan. In August 2018, a Twitter user tweeted that they were driving in the mountains of Kagoshima when they came across a sign that said, Kyoto O, Big Head O. The tweet and user account have since both been deleted, but you can easily find them archived on other websites today. When questioned more specifically on where, the Twitter user pointed others to head towards Mount Kimpo and explore the forest roads of Kumagadake. This part, at the very least, was true, and you can even find the exact location of where the tweeter posted the pictures of the sign in Google Street View. A quick look around the area shows some abandoned houses and even a graveyard, but nothing that really resembles a village. Of course, nobody else has ever seen this sign, meaning the tweeter likely made it themselves, planted it for a few photos, and then deleted their account after being called out on it. But rumors persist today that if Big Head Village really does exist somewhere, it's probably somewhere in Kagoshima. There's zero evidence of this, however, so take it as you will. Others have claimed that this village, much like Sugisawa, exists between realms, which is why most people will never find it. If the circumstances are right, whatever those circumstances are, then you might happen across it. But if not, then you can drive right past it and never know it's there. How convenient. Finally, is the story itself real? Considering that it was posted on Nichan, it's generally safe to assume that no, it isn't. But let's dig a little deeper. By looking at the original post, we can see the user's ID. By looking up the user's ID, we can see anything else they may have posted with it. And as it turns out, the person who posted the Big Head O story also posted other things on the same night. Lucky us. Both posts are other fictional stories of the supernatural, which makes it highly likely that Big Head O, the only post of the three to really make it big, is likely more of the same. Nichan is a popular place to share scary stories, because the anonymous nature of it makes it seem possible that maybe, just maybe, this weird and terrifying experience really did happen to someone, and no one can really call you out on it. Not in a personal way, anyway, making it safe to post whatever you want. For this user, they got lucky, and other users loved the Big Head O story. Perhaps because it was so weird, while the other two stories fell to the wayside. Is Big Head O a real village? Undoubtedly not, but that hasn't stopped it from becoming a popular urban legend over the years, much like Sugisawa and Inunaki before it. Who doesn't love a good hidden village story, after all? But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time. Back in episode 35 of Kowabana, we featured a story called Well in the Basement. I'll leave a link in the comments if you'd like to go back and listen to that before this week's episode. But in short, the story was posted in 2008, and it's about a man who takes on a dangerous job for some shady men to transport something underground. That something naturally turns out to be a body, and he's tasked with heading to Imperial Army Tunnel 13 to dump that body in an underground well with 2 other men. The door to that well has Imperial Army Well 126, or potentially 128, written on it, and inside the well, they discover 2 strange creatures crawling around the bottom. They look human, but have entirely smooth faces and only small holes where their noses should be. This freaks the men out, and they run. It turns out that the body they dumped was the son of an organized crime boss, and now the author is on the run, typing his story from an internet cafe in an undisclosed location. This particular story became quite popular when it was posted, and naturally, people wanted to know more about this Imperial Army Tunnel 13, and what on earth was lurking in the well behind door 126. Was the tunnel real? Could something otherworldly really be lurking beneath the streets of Tokyo? Were the Yakuza disposing of bodies for literal monsters to eat? Let's take a look. First of all, if you type Imperial Army Tunnel 13 into Google, in Japanese of course, then you'll surprisingly get a hit. You can apparently find it clear as day in Chiyoda City, Tokyo. There are even 2 uploaded photos. First takes you to above ground street view of some steel fences, behind which is a parking lot. The second photo takes you to a creepy stone tunnel that eventually leads to another steel grate door at the end. Was this actually it? Was Imperial Army Tunnel 13 an open secret? Well, not really. You may have seen this particular tunnel image before. It's not even in Japan. The picture is actually a tunnel from, excuse my pronunciation, Fort de Mutzig in France. You can find it on Wikipedia, amongst many other places online. Users are able to upload their own locations of interest and pictures to Google Maps, so it would appear that someone added Imperial Army Tunnel 13 as a prank. It's certainly not the first location of its type to show up randomly on Google Maps. Kisaragi Station often pops up all over the country until someone finally removes it, so this alone isn't really much to go off. But let's suppose that the tunnel does still exist, just not where Google Maps claims. As you may be aware, the space beneath Tokyo is absolutely full of tunnels. Many of these were built during the Second World War, and what's available to the public is only a small section of what's there. There have been entire books written on what tunnels may or may not exist beneath Tokyo at this point, so it's not crazy to assume that, yes, there are some tunnels down there that the public doesn't know about. But does that mean that at least one of them has a mysterious well full of monsters? Over the years, people have pointed out the similarities of this story to numerous other books and movies. There's a book by Akiba Shun, published in 2006, that talks about the supposed hidden secret tunnels beneath Tokyo. Others have pointed out the creatures in the well sound somewhat like those in the movie Descent, which came out in 2005, or even Clive Barker's Midnight Meat Train. The story was also posted on the occult forums of 2channel, so naturally, many suspect its legitimacy. It makes for a fantastic story, sure, but is there any truth to it? Well, probably not. The author further ups the stakes by revealing that the body they've been tasked with dumping underground is the son of a Yakuza chairman. No names are ever given, so it's impossible to check one way or the other whether someone really matching this description ever went missing. But by making the entire story revolve around Yakuza and their shady dealings, that immediately makes it harder for people to investigate, to see whether it's real or not. No doubt done on purpose, and it's also a good excuse to have a reason to go down into this creepy tunnel that isn't supposed to exist. As for the creatures in the well, there has been a lot of speculation over what they could be. The Imperial Army took part in numerous experiments during the Second World War, so maybe they were remnants of that. Maybe the creatures were something the Yakuza found and decided that that well would be a perfect location for getting rid of troublesome people. Maybe the creatures were actually kami-sama, and the bodies weren't being dumped there, as such, but were actually offerings to keep them happy. Perhaps they were yokai, or just plain and simple monsters. The most likely answer is that the creatures were inspired by numerous things. Pale creatures living deep underground with strange or even no facial features aren't exactly new. They're creepy and they seem like something that could exist in areas barren of light, which is why we see them pop up in media so often. How they got in a well hidden in a tunnel supposedly built by the Imperial Army suggests that they're perhaps leftover experiments from the war, but it's never outright stated, so speculation remains rife. At the end of the day, this story was just that, a story. It's told extremely well, and it features a lot of subject matter that people find interesting, which is why people still talk about it to this day. It also takes common and well-known urban legends to build a story that could possibly be true. If you remove the monster element entirely, then sure, it's not impossible to believe that there's a particular tunnel underneath Tokyo that the public isn't aware of, but maybe certain other groups are. Perhaps there's even a well in there that you could use to hide bodies in. The monsters? Well, they make the story far more interesting than just a simple old well. Few people would still be talking about the story today if that were the case. But what do you guys think about this one? Could it potentially be true? What could these supposed creatures have actually been? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time. Back in December 2009, a story was shared on 2channel that came to be known as Hitchhike. Nowadays, it's considered one of 2channel's all-time classics, and if you haven't listened to it yet, or if you just want to recap, I'll link the Kawabana episode it's featured in the comments. This week, we're going to be taking a look at this famous story and the surprising truth behind it. First, a very brief recap. Hitchhike tells the story of two young men just out of university, who decide to hitchhike from the top of Japan all the way back down to their home at the bottom of Japan. Roughly halfway back, in the Koshin area of Kanto, they happen across a camper van with a strange family. They hesitantly accept a ride, but soon realize it's a mistake. The father wears a suit and cowboy hat, the mother wears garish makeup, and there are elderly twins who drink, burp, and eat lollipops together but don't otherwise talk. There's also something making noise in the back that they're not allowed to look at. The family invite them to dinner, despite the fact that it's after 2 AM, and when they stop, the two boys finally make a run for it. Why? Well, there's another big guy already cooking dinner way out in the mountains, and they don't want to stick around to find out if they might end up in the pod as well. And they finally see what's in the back of the van as well. A deformed face screaming, "Mama!" The rest of the story features the boys running from this weird family and the unnamed big guy, at some point ending up at a public toilet where they hear a girl's cries. They never find the girl, however, and brush it off because they're still in flight mode. Eventually, they get back to civilization, and it turns out there was no camper van. The convenience store owner saw the boys walking away and was unable to stop them before they disappeared into the mountains themselves. A truck driver offers to take them to the nearest station so they can head home safely, done with their hitchhiking adventure, but on the way, they spot something that makes their blood run cold. It's the camper van, parked in a truck rest stop, but it looks old, like it hasn't been touched for decades. It's the same van, because it has the Christian cross on the front, and they find their bags inside too, which also look like they haven't been touched in decades. Something in the back screams, "Mama!" and they run off, and that's the end of it. They get home safely, but the trip and their near-death experience with a bunch of weirdos remains on their minds decades later. As you're no doubt aware, stories like this that are shared on 2channel are presented as true experiences. There's a massive online culture of sharing one's scary and/or supernatural experiences anonymously online, and numerous urban legends have been born out of these tales that, if not saved by readers, are often deleted and lost to the annals of time. Of course, the stories are only presented as true, and very few people actually believe they are, but playing along is part of the fun. Still, could Hitchhike have been a real story? Or, at the very least, inspired by real events? As it turns out, no. Not real events, anyway, but this famous creepypasta didn't just appear out of thin air either. The poster was inspired by something, just not real life. We hope, anyway. No, it turns out that this story was inspired by a little-known American horror movie by the name of Rest Stop. I'm about to spoil the entire movie here, so if you want to watch it yourself first, best run off and do that now. Rest Stop came out in 2006, a direct-to-video film that, I'll be honest, isn't amazing. But it does have an interesting plot that has to be somewhat pieced together. You're not directly told what happened, and you're left to infer events so the whole thing makes sense. To very quickly sum this movie up, a young woman and her boyfriend ditch home and decide to head to California. On the way, they stop at a rest stop so the woman can pee. When she returns, her boyfriend is gone and there's a camper van parked nearby. She eventually hitches a ride with them and discovers it's a family of weirdos who keep spouting off about sinners. There's a father, mother, twins, and, a deformed person in the back that she's not allowed to look at. She eventually runs and comes across someone known as the killer or the driver, a dude who's never seen but keeps trying to kill her and has apparently killed her boyfriend. At one point, when she runs back into the toilets, she hears a woman crying inside, but she's unable to help her. After much shenanigans, it seems she gets away, but nope. The driver appears behind her and cut to black. A year later, the rest stop has been revived and a woman in the toilets hears another woman crying. Turns out it's the protagonist, now dead and a ghost, trapped at the rest stop like the other woman before her. Mid and after credit scenes reveal the family killed the driver, and the sequel reveals that the driver's ghost then killed them. The rest stop is basically a trap for all of these ghosts, and they're unable to leave it, and that means the driver, the weird family in the camper van, and the girls in the toilets. Does any of that sound familiar? It should, because I just talked about it when describing Hitchhike. Now, obviously there are a lot of differences. Hitchhike doesn't just lift the story from Rest Stop straight as it is. Hitchhike is still very much its own story, but it takes some very clear elements from Rest Stop and uses those to create a similar, yet independent tale. First, and most obvious, the family in the camper van. This is pretty much taken straight as it is from the film, with Hitchhike slightly aging the twins and giving the father a cowboy hat, perhaps a nod at his American heritage. In both, the family are clearly not well and spout a lot of religious stuff, calling people sinners and whatnot. The big guy from Hitchhike is also inspired by the driver. You never really see him in either story, and he stalks the duo constantly in Hitchhike, like he stalks the woman in Rest Stop. Finally, the girl in the toilets. This is a bit of an odd moment in Hitchhike, and it makes more sense once you understand where it comes from. The boys stop at a public toilet on the mountain and hear crying coming from the girls' toilets, yet they can't find anyone in there, and when the camper van family then use those same toilets after, they don't appear to hear anything at all, despite the girls' loud cries. The crying stops once the big guy visits the toilets, and then the boys get spotted and run again. In Rest Stop, the girls are often killed in or near the public toilets, and several are heard crying inside. Or at least, they're ghosts that soon disappear. This toilet is almost like the nexus where everything emanates from, and the next girl will then hear the crying ghost in the toilets before she is targeted as well. Why did the boys hear a crying girl in Hitchhike? Because, just like Rest Stop, the big guy killed her there, and it's potentially that murder that trapped him and the campervan family in that area. This is not elaborated on in the story, and there's a throwaway line at the end where the truck driver reveals that a girl was murdered in those toilets a long time ago, but that was it. Knowing how the toilets work in Rest Stop, and how it works as a kind of main hub in the larger area where all the ghosts are forever trapped, that scene makes a little more sense in Hitchhike too. Just like Rest Stop, the campervan family and the big guy can't leave, and that's why their van is eventually found all dusty at a, you guessed it, Rest Stop, on their way out of town. In fact, this scene is also directly ripped from the Rest Stop sequel, where the characters exit a gas station and find the campervan sitting outside aged and apparently long abandoned. There's also a recurring incident throughout Hitchhike where the protagonists hear the Mickey Mouse Club theme, usually because the big guy is whistling it as he approaches. In Rest Stop, the song Amazing Grace can be heard over and over, generally at points where the protagonist is supposed to be scared and confused and danger is approaching. Unlike Rest Stop, in the end, both boys are able to escape and live out the rest of their lives without problem. Of course, because otherwise he wouldn't be able to share the story on 2channel. But it's interesting to know where the inspiration behind this famous story came from and how changes were made to turn it into a similar yet different story, tailored for a Japanese audience as well. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time.